Hello and welcome to our program, Where God Weeps, a program where we talk about the situation of the suffering church around the world. Normally in our program, we talk about challenges facing Christians within a certain country. Today, however, sadly, we're going to be speaking about a problem which transcends nationalities as well as borders. That is the problem of human trafficking. Between 800,000 to 2 million persons are trafficked every year. 80% are women, 50% are minors. To tell us more about this problem and some of the work that the Church is doing to try and help, it is my great privilege to welcome Sister Patricia Morey of the Talitha Kum project. Sister, thank you for being with us here today in our program.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
Sister, can you tell us what is Talitha Kum and when and why did it start?
Talitha Kum comes from the scripture. It's a phrase from scripture saying, "Little girl, arise." And these were the words spoken by Jesus to the daughter of Jairus.
Because they thought she was dead.
They thought she was dead and they were bringing her back to life again. And so this is a very symbolic phrase because it's thinking of the many, many people, women, children, men, who are trafficked throughout the world and who in a way are dead and need to be brought back to life. And this is an initiative of sisters worldwide. It's often referred to as a network of networks because there are 26 networks of religious sisters all over the world, covering about 81 countries, who are working to prevent trafficking of human beings.
Now, how does this work practically? I mean, you have a coordination, you are the interim coordinator at the moment?
That's right, and the Union of International Superiors General, these would be the leaders of congregations of women religious worldwide. We have an office here in Rome, and one of the sections in that office is the coordination of this program worldwide, because sisters have been trained and are being trained by the Union of Superiors General to work in the area of counter-trafficking, to take action in various aspects. And we're working in prevention, but we're also working in supporting the victims and also trying to work to see that those who are perpetrators are prosecuted in some cases.
Now, Sister, help me understand, how did human trafficking come across the radar of Catholic nuns? I mean, how would this whole thing started?
The very interesting thing was, I think, somebody in the State Department in the United States decided that if you mobilized Catholic sisters throughout the world, something would happen.
Because you are the ones working with the people on the ground.
Because sisters are on the ground and they're involved at a very local level in villages, in rural and urban areas, and they see what's going on, and also the people come and tell them what's happening.
So the feedback, or let's say the origins of this would have come from the ground with the sisters seeing this problem and being rather asking themselves, what can we do?
Well, already there were initiatives, there were small pockets of action and obviously a lot of prayer. A lot of consciousness of what was happening to the most vulnerable and the people who are on the margins of all societies throughout the world. And a realization that countries, sometimes a country is a country of origin or a country of transit or a country of destination. And in fact, some countries, you find all three phenomena happening within. So sisters were picking up the growth of this area, knowing that it was becoming a very lucrative business, hearing families saying their daughters had disappeared or their sons had disappeared, and saying, what can we do to stop this?
What year would have this been? What are we talking about?
Well, in the 1990s, you had the beginning of this phenomena. And I happened to be here in Rome at the time, and my own involvement began through visiting Ponte Galeria, which is the detention centre beside Fiumicino Airport. And there you come across women who have been trafficked, who are often then picked up here on the streets of Rome, who had come to Italy, for example, thinking that they were getting a job in a restaurant, or that a cousin had promised them that they had good connections somewhere and they'd be looked after. So they came full of hope and expectation. and arrived here and then discovered their passport was taken, they were locked in premises, and that they were used for sexual purposes. So they had become objects for use. They couldn't escape. They owed the traffickers huge amount of monies because they had paid for their fare to come here. So they were in debt. So even to clear that debt was an enormous challenge. So when you talk to women in Ponte Galeria, you only had to look into their eyes to see the sadness. And often they had left families, children behind, hoping
for a better
life, and also hoping to improve the life of their extended family back home. And it wasn't only women from Africa. You had women from Eastern Europe. Again, the borders had opened up, and I remember hearing a story of a young woman who, as she was handed from one mafia group to another, from Moldova to Italy, had been sexually used and was a broken human being. She was hoping to go home, but it was the shame too of going home, and that's the other thing you become very familiar with, is what you left to go to build a better life. Now you're coming home as a broken, desperate human being, traumatized, and you have nothing to show to your family. So there's a deep shame.
Yes.
And often families, one of the big challenges is families don't accept.
They reject them
the young women, or in some cases the boys. And other stories I had come across of young boys who had been promised that they would be taken in by agents here in Italy to football clubs. Now you can imagine a young boy
full
saying,
of enthusiasm.
I want to be an Inter Milan footballer, I want to play for Fiorentina or Roma. So they come here and find themselves enslaved. Or Chinese workers who were trafficked here for forced labour to work in garment factories or also in the leather trade. So,
and again, every time the passport is taken away.
The passport is taken away.
And they're virtually slaves.
And people are trapped. They're slaves. And they're afraid to speak out because there's a way in which they're held captive, because unless they obey the traffickers, they're told that their families at home will be punished. So you're held at both ends.
Statistics are unreliable, but it seems that human trafficking is second only to weapons trafficking in terms of the income that it generates. Where are the income generating points along the line?
Well, in a way, often they say that it is a close family member, can be even parents, who traffic a child or a woman or a relative, a young boy.
Also out of desperation.
Out of desperation, but also, I suppose we're living in a very materialistic world. I remember hearing a young girl from Albania saying that she was sold because her parents wanted to buy a television set. And the only regret that the father had was that he hadn't asked for more to buy a better television set.
It must crush the human spirit.
To feel that your parents...
So rejected.
There's a huge rejection in that. In other cases, I'm aware in parts of Nigeria, there's a particular city, Benin City, and for some reason that's become a centre from where women are trafficked here to Europe. Some of them possibly know what's ahead, but more of them don't, or those who know don't know the extent to which they will be used and abused. And you see, if you begin to come here to Italy, for example, in the beginning, I think people were coming as part of pilgrimages. So if you're moving through an airport with 6 women, it's very hard to accuse you of something. If you're carrying drugs, you can be caught with the product. So I think it was the way of moving people, if you like, along the supply chain was much easier and much harder to prove that a crime was being committed. And then you had border guards, people in customs, police who were turning part of the problem because they were turning a blind eye to what was happening. And eventually, I think people began to become aware of where the centres of entry, for example, into Europe were. For example, through Paris, I remember at one stage, it was easier to come through Paris than other parts. Come through Rome as if you were coming on pilgrimage. And now with the huge influx of migrants and refugees from Africa, many of those are seeking a good life, but there's no doubt that embedded into the refugee migrant problem and challenge is also people who are being trafficked.
You would think that this would be a problem that the governments should be addressing, and you would ask yourself, why necessarily should the Catholic Church play a role in what seems to be such a human problem, or such a structural problem, or a criminal problem, if you will? What is it that the Catholic Church, what is it that the nuns bring which is special to them?
Yeah. I think one of the things that's important is, in fairness, I think many people didn't realise the extent of the problem. And I think, for example, if I look at a country like India, many young people disappeared or seemed to leave their towns and villages, and people felt they had gone to the big cities to look for work. And they did, but they were vulnerable and they were on the edges of those societies. And therefore, when somebody promises you something, you're very attracted by it, particularly if it's overseas. Or if you're in a place like Nepal and somebody says in the large cities, in Mumbai or Delhi or in Calcutta, you will get work. So everybody wants to better themselves. So I think on the one hand, you were using the desire that people had for a better life, and everybody wants a better life for themselves and their family. So there was an exploitation of the human desire to do well and be a better person and have more opportunities. At the same time, I think the church became aware of the enormous desecration of the human person. When you're talking about people who have been sexually exploited or exploited for labour. Like the other day, I was talking to a young woman and her brother was taken at age 11. And he worked in forced labour for 3 years, and he was moved regularly. This was in the countryside in India. He was moved regularly from place to place, and he couldn't make contact. He didn't know where he was at 11 years of age. The only thing he could remember was a phone number that his mother had given him one day. And after 3.5 years, he got access to a phone, and he phoned, and then his mother was able, she thought it was her son's voice, and they were able to track the phone. But you could see, it was his sister was talking, she said the heartbreak that caused in the family. So when the church is looking at, the challenge for us and for the church at large is to bring life. I always think John's Gospel says that they may have life and fullness of life. And here are people looking for fullness of life, but being exploited in that very pursuit. So I think we as the Catholic Church need to be at the forefront, tackling the challenges of human life, human society, so that true fullness of life can come to men, women and children.
And I suppose for me the question also is, when you pick these people up, they must be so broken, as we've spoken about shame and rejection, humiliation. There somehow the love of Christ, the love of the church through the actions of the sisters must be something in a certain way, perhaps on a path of restoration of the person.
It is, and one of the things, just to be listened to as a person. Recently somebody said to me, you're the first person who has really listened to my story. And I think we underestimate the role of being a compassionate listener and allowing the person to tell their own story. We don't need to be invasive or intrusive. It's just to be there really with the compassionate heart of Christ. We can be that person and to hear the pain, because in a sense the healing has to come from within, because oftentimes young women and young men blame themselves, that somehow they did something or they were responsible for this misfortune that fell upon them, rather than that they were trapped within a system of people who were really preying on those who are vulnerable. And I think when we look at life today, and whenever we identify those who are the sheep really, who were preyed on by the wolves, and there are many types of wolves in today's world. And I think we have to be there as a listening, compassionate presence, and to form really a healing circle around people. for example, here in Italy, there are about 200 convents who take in young women and often their children who have been trafficked or who have been exploited in any way. And they give them a home, but a stable and secure place where they can be fed, because first of all you have to feed and give shelter and nourish, give the things for body and then of soul. I mean, Pope Francis is so right. You have to meet the immediate need. And if you meet the immediate human needs, then there's an opportunity for people to engage in a much deeper level in terms of their own search for meaning and their own search for a good quality of life. But unless you meet the immediate needs, the same is happening. I could point to centres all over the world, in India, Sri Lanka, in Indonesia, where again sisters are offering refuge and centres for people to come and to spend some time in healing and be protected.
Now, we talked a little bit about how you've been helping the people after the problem, but how do you, as religious communities, try and stop the problem from happening in the first place? And what kind of projects or programs do you have in place?
Well, many of the networks that are part of Talitha Kum and many of the groups have developed many different types of awareness-raising materials. I myself, in the early 2000s, there was a group of us here in Rome, and we developed an anti-trafficking toolkit. And it really had many different approaches to showing the depth of the problem, the extent of the problem, how you can recognize people who are trafficked, what you can do, what the international instruments are that offer protection to people, how you can undertake prosecution. So, and equally, spiritual resources for prayer in community, for prayer in parishes, saying this is something that sometimes there are problems in our world that are not driven out by action alone. They need our prayers and our focused prayer. One of the things that's going to happen next year is with the support of Pope Francis, the 8th of February, which is the feast of Saint Bakita, will be a World Day of Prayer in Action against the trafficking of human persons. Because, as you know, Pope Francis has said this is a scourge on the body, on the human body, and that we need to mobilise all people of goodwill to pray and act against this new form of slavery.
Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about some statistics here, because it's extraordinary. The human trafficking trade at the moment involves, well, as many as 12 million men, women and children are living presently in a state of modern slavery. And this number is expected to double to almost 27 million. Mm-hmm. How is it in a world which is so apparently interconnected as ours, where we have awareness of what's happening around us, that this kind of trouble and this kind of problem still seems to pass underneath the radar and we're just not seeing it?
I think, in a sense, the fact that we have such a mobile world in one way helps the movement of peoples for good and for evil. And therefore we need much stronger. You see, it's a very difficult position, because we're trying to open borders to have a more globalized world. And at the same time, we have to be vigilant at our borders to see that those who are entering are coming in a good and wholesome way. So I think governments, and at an intergovernmental level, there need to be strong legal instruments to prosecute traffickers. And also, I think the means whereby police forces can really see this as an area that they have to give dedicated personnel to. I'm aware that during this year, there was a meeting organised, I think, by the English Catholic Church, who brought many of the police here to the Vatican from different parts of Europe to actually look from a law enforcement perspective on what needs to be done. So I think that's the kind of facility that the Church can offer. And as you probably know, the Pope has established the Global Freedom Network at the Vatican, which is an inter-religious effort to combat human slavery. So it's at many different levels, even at the parish level. you know, if we open our eyes, often people will say when maybe a house is found in an area where trafficked women or trafficked men are kept, people would say, well, we noticed something funny happening there.
But we didn't know what it was.
We didn't know what it was. We didn't investigate. And I think maybe our society today is, we live separately and independently. And the call is to communio, to communion, that we really are the keepers of our brothers and sisters, that we really do have to look out for each other if we're living in a global village.
I want to draw the example because I read that in Africa, for example, some of the religious communities are working with truck drivers. What's that project?
Well, what the sisters have done is they've asked the various association of truck drivers to be truck drivers against trafficking, so that they promise not to take human cargo on board, so that they will watch out and they will alert the sisters if they see anything that looks like the illegal transportation of people. Equally, I know there's an initiative in the United States where hotels have been signing up, and they're hotels against trafficking. So they themselves are looking at making sure that no illegal activity happens in their hotel chain. So I think there's a way of mobilizing businesses, politicians, ordinary citizens to take action.
What are the signs? What do you look out for?
I suppose you look out for, I'm aware that if you begin to look into the eyes of people, you can see often fear, you can see a furtiveness. If you engage in conversation, what you find is you get very little information, because the person is terrified to give you any information about where they come from or what they're doing in a particular place or country or city. So it's not that easy to identify, but there, if you like, those who are working literally on the ground, they begin to know the areas of the city, or they begin to hear among the girls or the young men or those who have been trafficked. They begin to tell, but often, for example, in the trafficking of women from Nigeria, it was often women who were the madams who were in charge of the trafficking. So you can't even presume that it's men who are trafficking.
Yes, which is, it's somehow such a contradiction.
It's a contradiction. It's a contradiction. And I suppose driven by money, it's a power too, a power over people, causing enormous fear. And as I said earlier, preying upon people's hopes and desires.
Only 1% of those who have been trafficked ever then come forward. Why do so many, or rather, why do so few of so many only come forward afterwards to talk about it?
I think very few come forward to talk about the problem because their families are also held to ransom. You see, it's a double. You're caught in a bind because you're trafficked for forced labour. But equally, you're being told, if you don't work the way I want you to work, if you don't earn money in prostitution, then I'll make your family pay in whatever part of the world they're in. So, in a sense, the mafia gangs are linked. So there's another kind of globalized crime going on. So I think what we have to look for is globalized goodness, globalized speaking out on behalf of others.
Because it's such a criminal activity, have you ever, or have the sisters ever been in any danger as a consequence of the work that they're doing?
They have, yes. Many sisters know that they're in danger, and it's one of the areas that even for sisters, it is a risk in getting involved. Last week I was talking to a sister and she said, I've got to the stage, she said, I don't care if I have to die to make this problem known. But she said, I do know I'm putting my life at risk, because once I'm interfering in the income of the traffickers, she said, I'm a risk. Once I'm looking for prosecution, once I'm exposing their work in the neighbourhoods, she said, I'm at risk. But she said, if we're not prepared to risk for our brothers and sisters, why am I a dedicated religious? And I was left with a real challenge myself.
I was going to ask you...
I was saying, what am I prepared to risk as much in my life for my brothers and sisters. And I'm saying this as a human being, as a Catholic, but as a Catholic sister. But I'm saying it at all those levels. What am I prepared to risk? Because I've seen wonderful lay people who have risked their lives. In the early and the late 1990s, there was a young woman killed in the north of Italy for her work against trafficking. And to me, they're the modern day saints. They're the prophets. They're calling us to do something new.
How do you keep your faith when you are confronted by such evil?
Because I also see goodness and hope. And when you see the first signs of hope in the eyes of somebody who has been exploited and trafficked and has spent years in slavery, and you begin to see in their eyes that something new is possible, that they can reclaim their human dignity, that they know they're surrounded by love and care, you see the nourishing power of God's Spirit at work in human beings. So while there is evil, yes, in the world, there is also enormous goodness. And I've always believed, like Mother Teresa, you put your drop of water into the ocean of life, you light the candle, you do the little bit that you can do, whether it's by prayer, some small action, supporting sisters who are doing work, joining, making this problem aware in your parish, your neighbourhood. Then we're all doing our little bit, and the swell of the ocean, I believe, will one day turn back this problem.
Sister Patricia, thank you for having been with us today in our program.
Thank you very much indeed. It was a pleasure.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having been with us today in our program, Where God Weeps. And if you'd like to know more how you can help, either in prayer or action, I would encourage you to look at the contact information at the end of this program. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.